This is a car that you've seen on the channel before. This is the Cat N530D, and since we've last seen it, it's had a little change. It's been remapped. Now, what is mapping? Well, the long story short is that essentially your engine's control unit, ECU, has a series of tables that basically tell it how much fuel and air it's allowed to put in, and therefore, balance the combustion mixture for your car and to give you power. Now, by remapping it, technically speaking, remapping is just the process of changing those maps, but when us car nerds talk about it, we mean putting on what might call fatter maps, things that will give you more power, potentially a more eco-centered map as well if you want to swap things around. But generally speaking, we're talking about getting more power out of the existing hardware just by updating the software. So what are the benefits of getting your car mapped? Well, the immediate one is that you're getting more performance out of the same hardware, the same engine, the same, in this case, turbos, the same injectors, but you're getting more power. So at stock, this 530D with an N57 runs 241 horsepower and 540 newton meters of torque. But with its remap, it has a claimed 300-ish horsepower, but more importantly, it has 600 newton meters of torque, and that one is actually legit. Also, at least anecdotally, fuel consumption seems to be a little bit better, at least closer to the manufacturer's claimed figures, which it would never hit in the real world without that remap. Thanks to the added engine performance, you get, well, a lot more performance out of the car. There's a noticeable acceleration gain, there's better sort of high-speed performance essentially, and while it doesn't improve every aspect of the car, at least in this case this still has the same transmission software, which isn't the most performant of gearboxes, you do still get a very noticeable improvement in driving, well, feel, power, acceleration, everything you'd expect from having more power from your engine. Now, as with everything that costs money, it costs some money to do this. It depends who you go to. If you go to I know a guy type person, then you might be paying something like £150, whereas if you're going to, I guess, more reputable firm, then you might pay something more like 200 to 250, 300, something like that, which, considering the horsepower and torque gains that you get from it, might actually make it a pretty cheap performance upgrade. Beyond the immediate costs, there are some other cons that you might want to consider before remapping your car. Now, of course, I should make it clear this isn't legal advice or any of the sorts, but the immediate thing to think of may be your insurance, which, again, not legal advice, and you should technically declare any modification to the car to your insurers so that they can insure your vehicle properly. With that said, especially if you're just getting a base map installed, then you are potentially less likely to run into issues with that being, well, I suppose a problem with insurers. And of course, the other concern is the immediate engine health. You're pushing more power and more torque through the same pistons, the same turbos, and the same gearboxes. And so there is the concern that pushing your car too hard will mean lower, effectively, longevity of your parts. Now, for these sorts of diesel engines, especially if you're going with a relatively conservative map like the one that's here, then you're not gonna have too much of a problem. Realistically, if you're saying in relatively conservative terms, then it's still gonna last you just fine, especially these diesel engines tend to be relatively overbuilt, or at least well built anyway, and so I do not expect that a safe map is going to be too much of a problem. If you decide to try and put 350 or 400 horsepower through this with the same, turbos, injectors, head bolts, then yeah, you might start to have a problem. But if you're only doing relatively small upgrades, then it shouldn't be too bad. One very important note to consider if you do choose to remap your car is make sure that you pick someone who is doing a remap that knows what they're doing. It can fully brick your car, or at least very much brick your ECU, if you do it incorrectly, if you have, say, the ECU turn off while it's being written to, and they often take a fair while to write to as well. So be very careful, be mindful that you could be bricking your car by doing it, especially if you're going to try and do it yourself. There are a number of tools that you can get. This one isn't technically the right one, but something similar to this you could potentially purchase yourself, say on eBay, but I would be very, very careful with what you're doing and get someone who knows what they're doing to do it for you. On the whole though, the benefit of remapping, especially a car like this where you have a pretty reasonable horsepower gain for not much concern for both cost nor immediate, damage to the engine or transmission, drivetrain in general, is, at least for this car and this owner, is pretty well worth it. It adds a lot of extra fun to driving, gives you a little bit more power to poke onto the motorway, and it's generally a good thing. Of course, like I said, there are risks involved, there are costs involved, and so you should definitely do your own research for your own model of car before making any purchasing decisions. But at least for this 530D, you're getting essentially 535D levels of performance for a few £100, and well, that kind of sounds like it's worth that sort of upgrade. Now, the astute among you probably know that I own an Audi S4, specifically a B8.5 model, and that also is quite common for getting remapped. Now, I'm not doing it immediately, but I think I will be probably in the next sort of year or so, give or take. I don't necessarily need any more power, but when you have the option just dangling like a carrot on a stick in front of you, you kind of start running to it. So I may be doing a follow-up video at some point in the, well, not entirely distant future to let you know how my experience goes with that. I should make it clear that not every car makes sense to remap. A lot, if not most, natural aspirated engines won't have much benefit from an immediate map unless you're doing other hardware changes that would require that sort of change. Also, some of the turbo and even some supercharger engines tend to not see an immediate benefit unless, especially from superchargers, you do things like changing pulley sizes, or on especially smaller displacement turbo engines like the Fiesta 1 litre, especially the top of the line models, you really can't squeeze out too much more performance from those sort of stock configurations, and you often don't see as astronomical gains as things like this 530D or the S4, the 3 litre TFSI that I have goes from, I think, 333 stock to over 420, 430 just with a remap without touching the pulley. So that's kind of insane, but you don't often get that with a lot of other cars. Now, with that said, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. What do you think about remapping? Would that be something you'd do yourself? And if you have, what's the sort of horsepower gains you've seen? And what do you think about me remapping mine? Feel free to let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, if you're new here, I do these videos every week, so feel free to hit that subscribe button and the bell notification icon if you want to be up to date on these new videos. There's also a whole load of other videos on the end cards that you can check out, including videos on this 530D, should you buy a Cat N and buy a 530D in general, so feel free to check those out. Otherwise, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you all in the next video.